Morning, everyone. I'm Stu from Linchpin Media.
Dan Merritt from Linchpin.
So we're a digital consultancy company that's been in market now for 6 months. We're helping media businesses and publishers in a variety of different areas around their video strategy, their commercial strategy, analytics, data, and reporting. Welcome to our expert series, where we're going to be chatting to industry experts around upcoming trends and learnings from their own careers, and maybe even their mistakes.
Well, our first expert in our series is Jess Ruby. Morning, Jess.
Morning, nice to be here.
Thanks for coming. So Jess is a marketing leader that specializes in helping tech companies grow revenue and scale growth for the next stage. And so we'll just just jump right into it. So we've got 4 or 5 questions that we wanted to go through, Jess, and obviously have a discussion. So there might be a few follow-ups, but for me at least, first question would be, tell us what is growth marketing? What is this area that you specialize in? For the non-marketing people out there.
Yeah, it's kind of a newer thing. I think growth marketing has been around a long time, but only in the last couple of years it's really gotten kind of a name, and now people hire for growth marketing roles. Really, at least in my opinion, I'm sure the internet may disagree in some parts, but growth marketing to me is kind of a couple key things. Is you're usually tied to a revenue number, and your role is really about revenue growth for the company, whether that's through leads or whatever the metric is that typically your marketing team will drive. But growth is really like it's in the name. It's what it says on the tin. It's really what it means for your company and how any levers you can pull to get it to that growth. And so usually there's a lot of emphasis on performance marketing and conversion marketing. And it's really about sometimes about working with your sales team. It kind of depends on how the company is set up, but really it's about growing your company to that next level, whatever it takes to do so. So that's kind of the difference between, say, growth marketing and other kinds of marketing.
And do you traditionally have targets then in place in that role? So you talked around working with a sales team. Normally sales teams have sales targets, commercial targets. Is that similar in your experience in the growth marketing roles, or are they slightly different?
No, you're absolutely right. And often the growth marketing team will work with the sales team to set either a common goal or goals that tie into one another. I typically like when they're common goals, when they're like SQLs or just straight up revenue, so that the teams work well together. But yes, it's exactly like that. You have a target, you often have a bonus tied to a target, and it's a lot more structured like a sales team. And for some marketers, it's actually a little bit scary because they've never had like this number tied to their head. But it's a great motivator. It's very clear if you're succeeding or not. And for me, it's just like, it's clear, it's cut and dry in some ways. And you can really, really prove your value and your worth to your company.
Absolutely. There's a lot in the media at the moment, Jess, tied into the word recession. From a marketing standpoint, do you have any kind of recommendations for businesses? Appreciate that's quite broad, but it is something that obviously we can't escape at the moment within the industry news.
It's a great question and a really good point. I mean, I think the word recession, which we're all kind of talking about as we head into one, is terrifying, certainly for marketers, because your marketing division spends money. So typically, when we hear the word recession, like marketers fear for their jobs. It's so often that the first thing that gets cut is a marketing budget. And so marketing in a recession is a really interesting thing. And what it means for marketing and for business. I think what people forget is that marketing is a business function. You can't grow your business. I mean, you can, but it's very difficult. Like, your marketing really grows your business. Your marketing really helps you sell. It helps you stay alive in a bad market. And so if you cut that budget, how are you going to grow? How are you going to fight the battles you need to fight when things get tough? How are you going to continue to bring in revenue? And I know there's other ways of doing it, but marketing is hugely influential. And so often people get scared by recession and numbers and cut entirely their budgets, their teams. And that can be really detrimental. Like spending in marketing and continuing to have a presence during a recession, especially if you use the right voice and the right tone, and depending on what your product is, it can actually be hugely beneficial to your company. So, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody, rushed and cut their marketing budgets and cut their marketing teams. And then like a couple months later, some of the really smart ones started hiring back and started spending again. And they did really, really well out of it. I think it really depends on your offering, and you have to be really, really cognizant of what's going on in the industry. You don't want to be posting anything that's tone deaf, or kind of having your brand saying anything that they're going to regret if people are losing jobs, or depending on what's happening. This is kind of a weird recession, but whatever's happening in the recession. But it's so important I think it's so important to continue to do some marketing activities, even if you have to alter them. So.
Yeah, I do remember seeing in the pandemic, I forget some of the brands, but really tailored their marketing to the pandemic, and a shift in the way of consumers were just buying, and yeah, they saw the benefit of that.
And at speed, right, Dan?
Just quickly.
The ones that try to react on it, quickly, you actually saw, and again, not naming brands or sectors, but I think we could all probably identify some in our heads already where we're like, okay, they did that really quickly. The brought change of brand favorability or an increase within, affinity or something like that.
Yeah, and obviously, Stu, you're so well versed in like the content world. Like, the speed to which some of those like pandemic commercials went up that were like filmed on like an iPhone is like pretty mind blowing.
Absolutely. Jess, I wanted to just quickly ask something you were saying there around marketing budgets getting cut during perceivable, again, we're going to say the word recession, but economic downturn is another term that gets used a lot. Do you think, when you were saying that, and I agree with you, it's normally the first thing people do look at, is that because that direct correlation with be able to prove the performance, that your marketing has this effect on your business, and actually businesses sometimes struggle to show the impact because maybe they don't necessarily track or have KPIs in place? Like, I think it's a really interesting kind of conversation of why it is the first thing to go, especially when you're talking about growth marketing early and it being linked so tightly back to some sort of function, whether it be sales or leads or whatever it might be.
It's exactly that. It's exactly the issue, I think, with a lot of marketers, is they can't prove the value, or old school kind of marketing. Like, there wasn't as much emphasis on data and KPIs, whereas exactly like you said with growth marketing, you should be able to prove to a point your ROI and like the return on that spend, because again, marketing is one of the most expensive parts of your business. They spend money. There's lots of jokes as marketers like that they're just here to spend all your money. And I've certainly made that joke to a few of the CEOs I've worked with. But ultimately, again, it's a business function. You're getting a return. You are bringing that money back in. And if you can't prove it, and that's exactly the problem that happens, is that either they're not marketers aren't well versed in that world, because again, it is a little bit newer, or they're not able to kind of show, or they don't have the proper data funnel set up within their business to prove the ROI, to show how the influence they're having. And some marketing is unattributable, and certainly it's becoming an issue with some of the third-party cookies, but there's a level that you can show the value to, even if it's just overall like leads and revenue and how that kind of the different marketing activities, there's ways to show the value of it. And so many marketers unfortunately don't or can't. And so that's exactly why it ends up getting cut, because they can't say like, oh, I posted this awareness ad or this value out of this education piece, and it led to 3 people signing up and for your subscription-based whatever. So that's really, a challenge for marketers. And then the other piece of it is, I will say, is that there's a stat that's 24% of data gets rejected by leaders. So even sometimes there's marketers out there going, but I tried to prove my value and no one listened. Some leaders often will be like, oh, I just want to rely on my gut and like throw out the numbers and throw out the information and refuse to kind of want to see it. So, you can do everything you can do and still not kind of win that argument, but that's usually what happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sometimes it's just a it quickly becomes a cost exercise versus anything else. So I mean, I had a question around the importance of data and kind of specifically how you use data, but you touched on some of that. Is there like specific example you could share, just how you maybe overcome leadership, kind of looking at the marketing functioning and looking for ROI, just maybe a couple tactics or something that you've done in the past that or metrics, ways you've set up your marketing funnel to show that value.
I think, yeah, and I think this kind of goes for anyone who's even starting a business and thinking about doing a little bit of marketing. The most important thing is to set up your metrics properly. There's lots of free tools. Google Analytics is great. There's lots of ways you can set it up and learn kind of quickly what to look for. There's like leading indicators like website traffic, and then conversion through on any buttons you have on your website that are like a click-through rate. And again, overall revenue, but leads, like how are people coming into your business through the marketing that you're doing? Does the marketing that you're doing have a clear call to action? Is your brand really clear? What kind of actions are people taking on the stuff you're putting out into the world? Are they commenting? Are they engaging with it? That also counts. And then are they taking a next step? Are you finding that they're making it through the funnel? So I guess those are all kind of key things that I look at. And really what I would kind of recommend is make sure that you've set up some sort of thing in the back end and you kind of are looking at it and you know what to look for. And there's a lot of data in these, like in Google Analytics, that might mean anything to you.
I've seen, sometimes you can have a metric for everything, right? It's like, what is the most important, and what it resonates, especially if you're working with sales team, executive team. What's gonna resonate with them, that they're gonna see it's where see you have traction or not.
Yeah, and that's really tough because sometimes, and it changes, and it depends on your company. It depends on how your structure is set up. So you can, as long as you're set up properly, you'll kind of, and you keep an eye on it, you'll start to see what actually is influencing things. Right. And then eventually you'll probably change your mind and be like, this actually is not having any impact whatsoever on the bottom line or like the end result. And sometimes, you'll have to even if it's like you get 100 leads and only 25% of them convert, maybe that's good for your business. Maybe that's exactly what it should be. Like there's benchmarking and stuff that you can find on the internet that will tell you benchmarks for your industry. And that's a really good way to tell. And there's tons of videos out there and information on like how to set up your metrics. But certainly it's really tough when you're going to like a senior person. You want to choose like one or two key metrics that are really going to show influence. So like for me in the past, a lot of the time it's been marketing qualified leads. And that's where we've qualified them, which means we have some sort of indicator that there's intent, that they're the right part of your demographic. And that you can also then say what the percentage of that group and that cohort usually converts. And then if it is influencing revenue and you have a clear line of seeing that, that's a little bit tougher. Typically you need some sort of software involved. If you can show that, but typically if you can show like one or two leading indicators that have a high conversion rate and you can show the conversion rate on a monthly basis, those are your best ways to kind of get buy-in from leadership. But I would definitely recommend working with someone who knows data analytics, who can set up your back end. There's like technical stuff I couldn't do, and I always hire in really fantastic experts to help me to make sure that it's set up properly and that you're able to get some data and read what's going on for your business.
And I think you made and you've referenced this a couple of times around either working with other people in teams internally, but also setting expectations. Because again, if we're looking above or even peers, right? If you're working towards something, it's having those expectations in place upfront and early, so everyone understands whatever initiative you're trying to do or initiatives, that there is some sort of, this is good. Because again, you can come with, we've done these 10 things, and if you're reporting upwards and trying to prove success, well, what does that actually mean, and how does that move the dial? And if you're doing that halfway during a campaign, at the end of the campaign, if you're not setting expectations and those goals up early, whatever they may mean to your business, then you could potentially be caught on the back foot, right? Or you're just looking at everything and then you haven't actually redefined or defined what does success look like.
It's such a good point. And especially like when it comes to like video or something, like video is not good for click-throughs. Video is good for video views, but video is like one of the most influential tools we have right now. And it's one of the hardest to prove because people watch it and they don't click. But it doesn't mean they weren't influenced and they might not make a purchase decision later. So to your point, you have to set that expectation that if you're going to spend on video, the goal is not clicks, the goal is views and awareness that will help you down the funnel.
Yeah.
And
you made a good point about comments. You made a really good point about comments earlier. Looking at comments or looking at likes or looking at engagement. And engagement actually is, it's not the big number. If we're again just using the video as an example, the big number which you're chasing is, the millions of views. But actually, if someone's taken the time to comment, hopefully in a positive way, but, have commented or actioned in some way, actually, you could argue it's more powerful than just someone, viewing it. Again, it comes into those setting those upfront goals. And
one last kind of note on this is like, if you are really struggling to show attribution and ROI on something like that, the best way is to do, I was big growth marketing is about testing, experimentation. So set up a test, do like a 2-week test where you didn't run video, do a 2-week, maybe a month test where you do run video and see the overall results for your company.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, it takes a little bit of time, but like if it's working, the overall results will go up in terms of revenue, in terms of leads. So just because like it's not happening right in that moment, people need a few touches. People don't, just because they didn't interact here doesn't mean they won't interact sequentially down the line. So
lovely. So kind of on that, and a bit of a segue, Jess, is the whole piece around kind of branding and creativity. So kind of from a marketing point of view, when do you think that this should be part of your strategy, and like how important is that into your business and into your goals?
It's a great question, and what I'm like enjoying talking about lately. I feel like, especially as a growth marketer and a performance marketer, like branding is something like I'm not supposed to like talk about or like have much value in. It's like this scary thing, and everyone's like, oh, just worry about conversions. Like, did it convert? I think branding is so important, and maybe that's because of earlier in my career I started out in branding and agency. But the power of a brand, especially these days, like people like associate their own identities with brands.
Yeah.
We've gone so crazy that people are like, they're Apple or they're Android. Like it is so influential on how people see themselves and what they're wearing more and more, certainly this younger generation. Their clothes is like, if they chose a brand, it's like who they identify as a human being with. It's getting to be so much more important. There's a really great HBR quote where there's a comment, I'm going to mess up the quote, but it was like, Starbucks without its brand is just a coffee shop that makes a lot of alterations to their drinks.
Yeah.
Lots of choices.
Yeah, exactly. So really like the value of a brand is so important, and who you are as a brand and what you stand for or believe in, or even what you're saying absolutely impacts the bottom line. Absolutely impacts if someone's going to interact with you or convert. They've never heard of you, or they're just like not sure. These days, people don't know if you're legit, if you're a scam. That branding element, if they've seen that brand somewhere before, it absolutely makes an impact.
And then from a creativity point of view, which I think at the moment is just with so much kind of coming at us at all times through all devices, how much do you think linking creativity back into data and insight could that potentially look to? Do you think that can plays a key role at all?
I think there's so much you can link back to creative insight and data. And I think people assume that they're kind of like these separate entities, but absolutely not. You can see people are drawn to creativity. They're drawn to great branding. They're drawn to something different. And you can see that in the data from, again, we talked video views, we talked comments, engagement, interactions further down the funnel. It absolutely is trackable and attributable. You need the right software, you need to be looking at the right things. But you can see if someone liked or didn't like, and it doesn't, just because it's data doesn't mean you can't be creative. And I think there's like a misconception that those two things need to live in different spheres. And I definitely disagree.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. In previously in other industries, we've actually looked at, when we've done creative and content, we've actually looked to poll audiences during some campaigns to actually ask them, how does this appeal to you? That's just a very basic survey. Is this working for you? What do you think? And then taking that insight and then applied that kind of during campaigns, just to understand, because at the end of the day, your audience is, or the people you're trying to talk to, they're going to, if you can talk to them in a certain way and get that insight and feedback, what better way to kind of apply that? And I also think, get the right person at the right time in the right moment, that audience is ready, creativity then becomes key. And I think sometimes we search for the perfect size of a video or the perfect this or the perfect that, and actually it's like hit the person at the right time, get the messaging right and the creativity right, and people will do stuff and something will happen, and normally in a positive way, some sort of action.
That's a great point. And even if it's like, what you're going to put in your video, you want to be creative, but you also want to be solving like a pain point. Kind of what you were saying is like, you have to hit the right message at the right moment. So you can be as creative as if you want, but if you're not actually solving anything for anybody, it's still not going to have any impact. So you can even run a survey before you create branding or create, a video or create any kind of content, to be like, what is impacting my end consumer, the person I'm trying to reach, the most in their day, that I could potentially help solve, or I could help them with, or I could provide some value on, that ties back to my brand. And then you're going to end up, and then you can still be creative in that process once you have that information, and you'll end up with something that's going to perform. So.
Yeah, 100%.
So Jess, so we've touched on a few different areas, right, within your role and within marketing in general. But there's always new kind of, buzzword kind of tactics out there, or new strategies that you read about. So I've seen a couple, but what are some of the latest trends that you're looking at, watching? What do you think is new and maybe different, and maybe just a different name for something that's already existed?
I mean, it's a different name for something that already existing, is basically like marketing jargon 101. It's
in media.
Every year, we come up with a new name for something, and then everyone's like, have you done this? And you're like, I've heard of this term, and it turns out it's just...
Explain that to me, and then you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
It's very familiar.
I get a real kick out of marketing jargon. And my favorite one right now, I'd say, there's like two really trends that are that everyone's kind of talking about. I'd say the first one is dark social. And it's everyone's kind of talking about it. It's essentially like unattributable activity that comes through your channels. So they call it dark social because it's like someone says something on Reddit, or there's something, kind of a conversation in a forum, or something that happens online that's someone recommends something or recommends your product, and they come through and you can't figure out where they came from. That's essentially dark social. We used to just call it word of mouth.
I was going to say, us just
digital word of mouth.
Yeah. So like if I recommended something to you guys here, that might be dark social. So I think it's kind of funny, but also like it's becoming more of a thing, is like tracking's going away. People can't attribute as much as clearly. So I think people are trying to deal with that by creating new terms.
But so they've created a term, but are they able to actually track that? Is there like, are they just, is it one of those where, hey, we can't track this anymore, so we're just going to talk about dark social? But has anyone actually kind of, taken a crack at tracking that? Like, to your point earlier around, measuring and, having kind of key metrics, is that for certain products or services, companies, brands? I mean, that could make more sense, right? Where it's something that you'd really want to understand.
I might be getting this wrong, so people comment on this video if I'm incorrect. I don't think they have figured that out yet. I think that's part of why it's gotten its own term, because it's happening more and more and more, and people haven't figured out how to attribute it back, and as marketers, we're constantly trying to figure that part out. So I don't believe so. But there's certain things like you'll buy your own keywords when you're doing like search engine marketing. And they're called branded keywords. And sometimes you'll have tons and tons of traffic, people coming in from branded keywords. And I always used to joke with my team is like, no one woke up this morning and just like Googled the name of my company. Certainly when I worked for small startups, it's like, how did you hear about it? It's like, clearly you heard about us from somewhere else, but attributed back, it's just attributed back to, they clicked on a branded keyword and you're like, okay, well, where did you hear about us first? And that's kind of the dark social thing again, where you're like, I don't really know where you originally found out about us. Did someone recommend it? Did they receive it in a forum? Did someone on the Slack channel tell you about it? So that's kind of where it comes down to. I don't think so.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I mean, it clearly works, right? You see, I mean, it's always existed. It's just, yeah, make a good point around becoming more relevant with some of the other things going away.
Yeah. And the only other trend I'd just mention quickly is omni-channel selling is like become a big thing, where like people are buying through Instagram, buying through, I think eventually probably TikTok and the channels that traditionally you couldn't buy anything through.
Yeah, and that's just going to keep evolving. I mean, it evolves at a daily rate.
Yeah.
And then back to your bit around tracking. How are you making sure that you're tracking that and you're getting then the proof of performance off the back of that?
Yeah.
All that stuff. So final question from us, Jess, is it's a little thing we're calling kind of what three things. So we are a small business, as you know. So what would you say the three things are that, you know, small businesses should consider when they're thinking around marketing? And you've highlighted some really good points already today. But yeah, if there's three things that people should know, need to know from Jessica Ruby, what would they be?
Oh, I talk so much. Three things are going to be hard for me.
Top three.
I would say...
Yeah.
Three things. Set a marketing budget. Set like one for yourself. Definitely set up tracking. And experiment with stuff in a structured test. That would be
I like that.
Yeah.
Make sure you check timelines, check all the factors, what's your hypothesis, and your results, so you know if it worked or if it didn't.
Yeah, you alluded to the experimenting bit back earlier in the piece, and I think that's so true. And sometimes people are, sometimes I don't know if afraid's the right word, but to test and try, because yeah, maybe they've got goals, they've got a set budget, they've got, you know, they don't feel that they have to, but if you don't experiment, how do you know if something's gonna work or not, or try new things? So set your budget, set your tracking in place, and then look to experiment. Great three things, Jess. Nice.
Yeah, that's great. And then and really appreciate you coming, Jess. Lots of insight. You know, I'm more of a non-marketing person, so lots of learnings for me. So hopefully there's a few things for people to take away. You know, we're gonna tag Jess when we post this. So anyone that wants to reach out and speak to Jess, or if you have, you know, any questions, or you know, you want to have a discussion on some of these topics, you know, feel free to reach out to her.
What platforms are you on?
LinkedIn's the best way. So
Perfect.
Okay, well, that's great. So again, thanks, Jess, and
Thanks a lot,
we'll be
Jess.
posting this shortly.
all right, thanks guys, that was fun.
Take care.
Take care.
Thanks, Jess. Bye.